Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third session in the BALC Supervision for Success series. My name is Jim Hoko. I am the Executive Director for the Behavior Analyst Leadership Council, and I'm glad everybody is here today. We are a behavior analysis trade organization. We were founded in 2015, and we are committed to supporting behavior analysts serving as leaders, managers, and business owners. And I'm very, very excited to announce that we are going to Miami for an in-person conference between March 2nd and 5th of 2022 at the Hyatt Regency in Miami. And everybody is welcome to come. We are planning on putting on a great conference in a very good location. And we're planning on having fun and relaxing and networking a little bit. The Hyatt is located steps from the Miami Riverwalk and close to the Port of Miami, the Brickell City Center, Bayside Marketplace, and Little Havana. So if you are tired of being shut inside and going to all of these Zoom presentations, hopefully you can get on an airplane or get in a car or walk and go and join us in Miami. We want you to make it in Miami in March between the 2nd and the 5th. So please save the date. Please note that this live presentation will be recorded and available for viewing at a later time. To enable viewers of the recorded version to collect continuing education CEUs, the speakers or moderator will be inserting participation words at a few points during the presentation. Those viewing the recording will need to submit participation words for verification of participation in order to acquire the CEUs. Submission of the participation words are required for earning CEUs for the recorded version of this webinar only. And please keep in mind there will be a CEU processing charge if you have not registered for the event. You will not need to submit the participation words if you are participating today on April 22nd, 2021. Now, to get the CEUs, you're going to need to watch the recorded version, note the participation words, email info@balcllc.org with the subject line CEU request, include your name, the BACB number, the webinar title, the participation words. You'll then receive a reply with further directions on how to collect your CEUs. Please note that the date of the email will be the date on the CEU certificate. And now it's my pleasure to reintroduce, Tyra was here with us in February to talk about ethics, and we are going to welcome Tyra Sellers. Hello, Tyra. She is the Director of Ethics for the BACB. She has an MA in Special Education from the San Francisco State. She has a JD from the University of San Francisco, a PhD from Utah State University. Her interests are professional ethics, training and supervision, as we'll be talking a little bit about today, assessment and treatment of severe problem behavior. We are so happy to have her. She has over 2 decades of clinical experience and is a leader in our field. She's going to talk about strategies to enhance performance management. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Tyra.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone is doing well, whether or not it's late afternoon or early evening where you are. It is 4:30 where I am. All right, so hopefully everyone can see the slides. And I am not going to be able to participate with you all in the chat, unfortunately, because it's through just a slightly different platform. But if you have questions, please put them in your chat, and then Jim will be kind enough to move them over so that I can see them here. And I am pretty good at being able to check out the chat and then respond to the questions. So please feel free to ask questions, or if I go too fast over something, I've got a fair amount of content in here, and some of it I'm going to go over fairly quickly. You will have access to a PDF of the slides, as well as 2 articles that I'm sharing, and a PDF of an assessment tool that I'm going to go over tonight And it comes from one of the articles, but I extracted it into a separate PDF for those of you that want to go ahead and use it and maybe don't have access to Adobe or something like that. So I know I just recently learned how to extract pages well from a PDF. So trying to support those who might not have learned that just yet. So what I'm going to talk about today are some strategies to enhance performance management. And I am going to focus a little bit on behavior analytic content, but the strategies I'm talking about, the steps that I'm talking about, you don't have to be a behavior analyst to implement them. And you certainly don't have to be implementing them with a behavior analyst. The strategies I'm going to talk about will work for, you know, behavior analytic staff from frontline all the way through clinical leaders, but also, you know, front desk staff and operations folks and things like that. Because hey, guess what? We're all humans. So we all fall prey to the laws of human behavior. I do need to make a disclaimer. The information that I'm presenting tonight is not affiliated with the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. It's just my own opinions, my own information. So please do not take anything I say as any sort of official representation or position of the BACB. All right, so hi, I'm Tyra. I am the Director of Ethics at the BACB. But the bulk of my career, I was in clinical practice. I also was a professor at Utah State for a few years, and I had a lab there. And I've worked across a variety of settings and had the pleasure of being able to manage and supervise a large number of folks in a wide variety of contexts. And so performance management, training, supervision, I think are incredibly critical to the success of our profession. So I'm really excited to talk about some strategies, hopefully that will help you all take a little bit more of a streamlined approach. So let's kind of frame why it's important to think about performance management and really care about it. I'm going to focus on individuals that are certified. I'm going to share a little bit of data, but you know, again, we should care about the folks for whom we're responsible. We should create environments where they can flourish. We should endeavor to have sort of a service leader model where we are doing our best to create environments where people can be effective, where they can be happy, where they want to work. And at least that's my opinion in terms of how we can be effective leaders. So in ABA service settings, we know that turnover is very high, anywhere from 30% to 75% at the direct line staff level, and then lower, which is great, 5 to 20% annually for supervisors, for BCABAs and BCBAs. And some researchers calculating, much smarter than me with math, calculating kind of the cost of that, have estimated turnover for a single behavior technician line staff to be $5,000, so per individual that turns over in your organization, and $10,000 for someone at the BCBA level. Now, those data are a little bit older, so it might cost a little bit more these days. Maybe it costs a little bit less in some settings if you're able to systematize, manualize, and automate some of your onboarding training. So, you know, it depends, but at any rate, we know that it happens fairly frequently and it has a financial cost, not to mention other costs in terms of morale and client satisfaction and things like that. Now, these data are pretty interesting. If you've been certified for a while, these data might shock you. What they're representing is that 50% of those individuals certified at the master's level have 4 or fewer years experience. That means 50% of us have earned our certification somewhere between the last 4 years and today. And the other 50% of us have 5 or more years. Just to put that into perspective, we have currently 45,915 certificates at the BCBA level. We have 150,000 across all certification levels, which is staggering. So we've roughly got 23,000 on each side. That means half have a lot of experience. That's not to suggest that those individuals with 4 or fewer years experience don't bring amazing gifts and benefits to our profession. They bring energy, they bring a connection to current trends in clinical work and in research. They bring an understanding of technology and how we can bring that to bear on our clinical work. That said, they also have had less time to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and really develop uh, a wide repertoire of skills, as well as a wide group of individuals to whom they can go to for support. So when we talk about performance management, that's also framed in um, this current set of circumstances that means many individuals who are supervising and managing don't have a lot of experience. So it's important for us to really think about how we can build systematic procedures and steps within our organizations or our practice that will provide effective performance management. We also know that the number of years experience that supervisors or that clinicians have positively impact the outcomes of their clients. So again, as we have a larger percentage of folks with fewer years of experience, it means that we really have a burden to make sure that those folks are trained well, and that we are engaging in ongoing performance monitoring. All of those together make up performance management. So your staff impact so many things and many more than what I'm going to share in these slides. But they impact things like client satisfaction and client outcomes. Stakeholder, like caregivers or teachers or funding source, stakeholder satisfaction and outcomes of stakeholders that are participating in services. Satisfaction and outcome for trainees or supervisees in your organization, staff retention, staff satisfaction across all levels, and your bottom line. And all of these things can be positive impacts or they can be negative impacts. So if we know that our staff impact all of those variables, who impacts your staff? Well, I would argue we all do as managers, as supervisors, as folks that are responsible for the onboarding, the ongoing training, the ongoing support. We're the ones who can impact our staff. So we are uniquely positioned to engage with those staff in a way that hopefully will maximize all of those impacts in a positive direction that I just shared on the screen before. And it's not about just expecting folks to work harder. It's not about modeling working harder for your folks. It's not about telling them to work harder or trying to trim things so that everything is more streamlined. That might move the margin a little bit, but I don't think that that's going to produce sustained change, and it might actually increase your turnover. I think one of the things that we can focus on is creating situations where folks really love where they work. Individuals who are supported, who find reinforcement and enjoyment at their work will engage in what is called discretionary effort. So you have the minimum amount of effort required to do the thing that is expected of you, and then you have discretionary effort. Some folks will describe that as like the extra change in your pocket. And that is what we want to do. We want to create a situation where our staff feel so valued and are so excited to be at work that they're doing what's asked of them. And in many instances, they're kind of going above and beyond. And that above and beyond might just be doing what they need to do with joy and enthusiasm, thereby increasing the positive culture. It may be doing a little bit extra. Like, sure, I have to put away my materials, but I could also organize this general area, right? So that's really what we want to focus on. And I really love this quote, train people well enough so that they could leave because they've got such great skill sets, but treat them so great so that they don't want to leave. That's what we need to be doing. So there are a couple of things that we can do right out of the gate. We can build rapport. Sorry, I think my animation might be a little bit wonky, but we can build rapport effectively with our staff. We can ask questions about them. We can engage in behavior that lets them know that we care. We can find out what's important to them. We can make sure that we're connecting them with supports when they need it. We can create and curate culture that is important to us, whatever that culture is, a culture of inclusivity, I hope, a culture of celebrating diversity, a culture of professional development and valuing our clients, whatever that might be. But we have to know that that's what we want to do, and we have to actively engage in behavior to that end. We can provide professional development opportunities. The opportunity to continue to grow and learn is positively correlated with staff satisfaction and staff retention. And there's a little bit of sort of shaping, I think, that we need to do. And I think this is true in practica and in coursework, as folks are being prepared to go into the workforce. That idea that, just because job offer A pays me $5,000 or $10,000 more a year, that might not mean that that is a better option if company B is aligned with my values, if they work actively to build and curate a culture that I find enjoyable, if they provide money for professional development, if they provide internal professional development, if they provide internal mentorship and support for me, if they provide an ethics hotline or network that I can get support with all those tricky things that are going to come up and I'm not very well positioned to deal with yet. So it's important that we're communicating those things and that we are showing the value in those things. Also, we can provide growth opportunities. So growth opportunities within our own organization. And that requires us to think about the different positions and think about the critical skills necessary in each of those positions, and then build performance systems that allow us to evaluate whether or not A, folks are crushing it at their current work expectations, but also if we know what the next level up, what those expectations are, we should be able to start seeing indicators that an individual would be great in this other position. It's a terrible idea to promote people just because they're committed or just because they're great at this job, because what makes you great at this job might not be what you need to be great at the next level up. So we need to build systems that not only provide growth opportunities, but that are sort of clear about the expectations and highlight those pathways for folks. And then solicit feedback and make changes, to our systems, our processes, whatever it might be. So it's important that we are continually asking for feedback within our performance management systems from our stakeholders, from the people that get the work done. We need to build a culture of not only asking for it frequently in meetings, providing opportunity for anonymous surveys or feedback wherever possible, but critically, we have to be responsive to that feedback, whether or not I'm being responsive to my single staff's feedback to me, or I'm being responsible to a group of individuals or an entire division. And we should link it back. If you get anonymous feedback from your staff about something that you can do to increase the quality, increase the satisfaction, increase the efficiency of something, don't own it. Give it back to the staff. Even if it was anonymous, you can announce it as, our staff gave us incredible feedback about this thing. And because of that feedback, we're able to do X, Y, Z. And then if you can collect any sort of outcome data that suggests that that really was a great idea, make sure you share that back to the organization. So folks need to contact experience in their performance management systems, that when they give feedback, it's not only heard and something is done with it, but that it's valued and appreciated by the folks in the organization. Another easy thing that we can do right out of the gate is we can find out what staff value. We can find out what they like. We can find out what's meaningful to them. Um, it's, I think, a misperception that all staff are always motivated by, let's say, more money. I think people understand that something like an extra $100 really doesn't necessarily translate to a lot in your pocket. A very small raise might actually, you might not realize much at all. And if it's a raise in just the right range, in some instances, you may not end up getting much of that back at all with taxes. So I'm not saying don't give people raises. Like, certainly pay your folks and, give them $1 bajillion if you can. But there are lots of other things that you can do. You can do things like get people subscriptions to journals that they find valuable, buy them books for professional development, buy them access to a webinar or help send them to a conference, connect them with people, invite in outside speakers and have them do presentations that might not even be about the work you're doing, but your staff value it. So, and how do you find out what they might want? Well, it's pretty simple. You just ask them. Here's an example of a preference assessment survey that you could use for staff that was created through Chief Motivating Operations. And this is just an example of something that we can do to ask folks to rank things that they find valuable. So some of the things on here, I really like social interactions. Professional development is important to me. And you could get more specific. Do you like, access to books? Articles? Do you like guest speakers? What specific areas or topics are you interested in learning about? You might find out, you've got a lot of clinical staff that really want to learn more about how to have difficult conversations. Super easy. Buy a bunch of the Crucial Conversations book and run folks through a book club. And you might even be able to translate some of that into behavior analytic content and offer CEUs for them. So there are things that you can do that will be immediately impactful for your staff. And the way you find out is asking. Oops, I'm sorry, over clicking. So now that we've kind of talked about, like creating a positive culture, building rapport, getting to know your staff, thinking about how you can create an environment that will allow them to shine and do their best work. Let's talk about training. That's kind of the next piece. There are some data suggesting that individuals might not necessarily be getting the highest quality training or even any training at all in some circumstances, and that's problematic. In this study by DeGeneiro, Reed, and Henley, it was a survey, and they found that 55% of folks said that only 55% said that they received some sort of initial training post hire. So in terms of structured onboarding training, and sadly, that training, so the little more than half that did receive some onboarding training, that it really focused on sort of just didactic type instruction alone. Let me tell you, or let me give you a manual for what's expected of you, which we know is not optimally effective and sometimes ineffective, depending on the skills that we're trying to teach. And that 71% did receive ongoing training and support after they had been onboarded and were at a company for a while, but that those opportunities focused mostly on lecture, which is also not necessarily the most effective way at really solidifying skills for folks, or through monthly feedback, which feedback is great, but monthly feedback is pretty distal from the kind of behavior that the specific behavior that we want to be influencing. So these are not really in line with best practice and what we know to be evidence-based. And this was shocking. 33% of individuals that provided supervision said that they never got any specific training on how to effectively supervise. Now, I think that's starting to shift now. We've got more requirements from the BACB around supervision, performance management. We have more scholarly work available out there on these sorts of topics. And so I think this is going to shift. These data are a little old. It would be great to have some more surveys coming out that are a little bit more timely. And there are a few that have been published and I think that will be coming out soon. So if we're going to train, which apparently for 45% of folks, they weren't getting onboarding training, we're well positioned to train effectively. And it doesn't always require that much more effort or that much more time or that much more money. And in fact, in many instances, doing it well up front could be done in a way that saves you time, that saves you money, that saves you effort, and that could produce more consistent training results with your folks. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. These are two great articles, one by Parsons and colleagues and the other by Novak and colleagues. And the one on the left by Parsons and colleagues focuses specifically on behavioral skills training. The other newer article by Novak and colleagues has a great section on behavioral skills training, describing it and giving some practice recommendations, but also has a couple of different areas that I think are great, particularly for business leaders, whether or not you're a behavior analyst. Full of great information, very easy to use, and a terrific amount of resources that you are directed to. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about behavioral skills training and walking through some of the primary components. The first thing to do when we're giving training, and I would say, I would recommend everybody to get so fluent with the components of behavioral skills training that you use these same components in a slightly different, maybe a slightly lesser concentration, even when you're giving in the moment feedback. So certainly your structured trainings should be developed using behavioral skills training, but you also can use these strategies just in your in the moment feedback. So the first thing that you want to do in training is provide a rationale for the skill or the skills that or the knowledge that you are training on. And that includes discussing things like, why is it important that you do this thing? And also, why is it important that you do it in this way? What are the benefits that the client realizes, or the stakeholder, or your staff, what have you? What are the risks of not doing this way? Or what are the risks that we're minimizing? And how are we measuring the way we're doing it? Like, how do we know if we're doing it well, right? Like, we will be collecting procedural integrity data. Someone will be doing checklists to see if you are implementing things correctly. Or, we're going to be looking at your data, client outcome indicators, things like that. But talking about the rationale and how the outcome of doing the thing are used are critical pieces that are often missing, but they make the skill tangible, and it doesn't become, we do this thing just to do this thing, or I do this thing because they told me to do it. No, I can tell you I do this thing because it increases safety, or it is more efficient in terms of skill acquisition, or it's safer for clients, or what have you, right? So you need to make those connections for folks. And then when possible, provide written instructions. Make sure that you are writing at the level for the audience. And we have some great studies out there that, for example, compare directive language like you must XYZ, or you have to blah, 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 right? Whatever the thing is, versus it's a good idea in written instructions. Now you're going to maybe hear a little bit different when I talk about feedback, but at least we have one study pointing us to using directive language in our written instructions, and that they should be written as absent of technical jargon as possible. And I get it that we work really hard to get our degrees and we want to use this terminology, but particularly if the people doing the thing are your line techs, you want to make sure that you're dropping jargon wherever possible, unless it means something so precise, right? Then you need to use it, but that means you have an additional burden to train that thing to fluency. And when you're thinking about your written instructions, you want to make them super duper useful. Your training materials should be your support materials for implementation, or at the very least, your training materials, if they're more in depth, should include kind of a briefer version, an at a glance version that could be implemented in the actual setting. So bullet points, headers, photos if possible, or diagrams and flowcharts, but you want them, again, to be useful. You want them to be a support that someone could go to as they're acquiring the skill to ensure that they are doing what they're expected to do. Okay, so we've got describe the rationale, we've got provide the instruction in writing, some sort of tangible support. Then this is the piece that gets missed a lot, modeling. The demonstration piece. Now you can demonstrate it live, which is totally fine, or you can make a video for your models. I suggest that if you are a provider agency, especially for training that isn't going to change very frequently, things that you onboard everybody in the same way all the time, consider systematizing those and making training videos. It's going to reduce time required. It's going to streamline. You can pause and play back, which is different than a live demonstration. I mean, you can kind of pause, but you can never redo the thing exactly the same way. You can stop and draw attention to different things. And everybody gets the exact same exposure. So you don't inadvertently get some people trained slightly better because one trainer is just a little bit better or builds better rapport or what have you, right? So you get a little bit more consistency with your outcomes. And I put in the DeGeneiro and colleagues 2019 reference because they have a nice published guide for creating these sorts of training videos. For me, when you're doing formal training, your models should always be scripted. Obviously, if they're videotaped, but even if they're live, it's the same kind of reasons that using a video model is nice. It ensures consistency, minimizes drift, make sure that you're being precise in the things that you're training and everybody's getting exposure to the exact same thing. And also often unless you are very well trained in theater, frequently doing modeling, kind of same with role play, which we'll talk about, sort of devolves into ridiculousness. So having a script ensures that people are going to sort of stay the course. When you're modeling, you can eventually, with several models, you can include multiple exemplars, and that will promote generalization. So you can use different materials. If you have videos, you can even have several different people modeling the thing. And so that's another reason that videos are great, because you don't have to have that many live people there that you're paying and who aren't able to go do something else. And then you can go from simple to complex, whether or not you're modeling live or it's a video model. You can model the simplest version of the task or the skill, and then systematically, usually you model the simple thing, then you proceed with the next steps of behavioral skills training, which we'll talk about, and then you come back and you can do a more complex version. And more complex might mean there's problem behavior occurring in the examples. There are disruptors or distractors or things like that. And I think there's often a question, should I model doing it wrong? I say yes, but there's a huge caveat. Only if, when you are modeling it wrong, you are clearly indicating why it's wrong, what was wrong, why it's wrong, and what should be done differently. you have to be very careful. I wouldn't start modeling mistakes until the basic skill was very fluent. So I might go all the way through my behavioral skills training with the basic skill set and then come back and say, okay, here is a more complex version. Or now I want you to identify what I'm doing wrong. And that's a really critical skill if you're training folks that then need to train other folks. So you're training clinicians and they're going to need to train RBTs, or parents, or caregivers. So okay to include mistakes, provided that you minimize the risk that people are going to miss that it was a mistake and that's actually how they should do it. So you have to make the mistakes very salient. You have to clearly label them as a mistake. You have to clearly state what was wrong about what was done, why it's wrong, what are the risks, what is it messing up, and then how to fix it. So hopefully I made that very clear. All right, so the next step in behavioral skills training is role play or practice plus feedback. Now, sometimes when you see behavioral skills training listed out, it will have these as two separate steps, role play or practice, and then feedback. But really, it's role play and practice with feedback embedded. And all of the steps, you're sort of going forward, and then you might go back a couple, and do something more complex, and then go forward, and then go back a couple. So you're kind of moving around across these steps depending on the complexity of whatever the skill is that you're training. But you want to have a pre-identified mastery criterion before you start your role play. So you want to know already, I'm only going to check this person off on this training if they are able to run through, these 3 role play scenarios that I have scripted out with 0 errors. Or they're going to need to do it with 2 different trainers or what have you, right? They're going to have to do it twice with the trainer and once with the client with 0 errors or with 90% accuracy or whatever, right? That's up to you to decide that. You should not have a cookie cutter mastery criterion. Your mastery criterion is going to be based on what are the risks associated with any errors. If you're talking about, procedures around problem behavior, feeding, some life skills like, street crossing, money type skills, like you don't want really a margin of error with those sorts of things. But there may be other skills where it's like not such a big deal if it's not perfect every single time. So, but you want to have that identified ahead of time. Don't go into training and then kind of figure it out as you go. This needs to be scripted out before you jump into training. So some considerations with role play and practice. You can have your trainees or your supervisees do it with the trainer, or maybe with confederates. You have multiple trainers there. But again, bear in mind, that's more human time that you're having to allocate. I'm not suggesting it's a bad idea. You can also have them role play with each other, which is fine, provided that you have very structured role plays. And then it may be the case that at some point you want them to role play or practice with the actual client, the stakeholder, staff member, whomever the natural target is that they would be demonstrating this skill or this task with. But when it comes to using the skill in training with a client or a stakeholder, you need to make sure that there are no risks associated with what you're asking them to do. So it may be the case that they have to be trained up to competence with a confederate before they can do a few training trials with a client or a caregiver or something like that. You want to make sure you have scripted training or scripted role plays for your formal training. Again, most people hate doing role play. So leaving things up to them, letting them decide, letting them come up with stuff on the fly, it's probably not going to go well. You may be inviting errors. So it's better to have scripts, very clearly defined roles. And I think within your role play, you can include multiple exemplars again, just like with your modeling. You can go from simple to complex with your role plays. And again, if especially it's important for individuals to be able to identify mistakes for themselves or in others, you can include role play scripts that have errors and then what's going to happen, or that include distractors or disruptors. So you give the confederate the script that indicates that at some point they're going to engage in some problem behavior, or they're going to say they don't understand or whatever, but the role play trainee doesn't know, and then they have to react appropriately. So, but you want all of this drafted out, scripted ahead of time. I'm just going to pause and see if Jim needs to pop in any questions for me up to this point. Everything's okay. All right, I'm going to keep going.
I was waiting for the chance to pop in and say we do not have any questions at this point, but we are here and posed ready to transfer them to you as soon as they come in.
Thank you. All right. Well, first participation word is compassion. And while I leave this up just for a second, I'll also encourage folks, as I'm talking about things, if you have ideas to share with other people that are attending, share it. If you have great experience using video samples, video models in your training, you did videos with voiceovers, or you did a PowerPoint with screen, like pictures of the task and then voiceover, or text to describe it, please share your ideas and things that have gone well so that other folks can learn from that. All right, so now we've got a great culture where we're thinking about turnover, we're thinking about creating value in the company or in our practice, or in our practica site, what have you. We've got great training that we're doing. What do we do now? So I think that often this is where things fall apart. It's sort of like, yeah, I trained them, they're good to go. Unfortunately, what we know is humans drift from our optimal performance during and just after training. The longer away from training contingencies, the more we're likely to drift. We might drift because we skip a step and nothing bad happened, and so it's more efficient. We might drift because we are just forgetting some of the nuances of the specifics that we were taught. We might drift because we don't like part of it and we're just going to choose to omit it. We might drift because contingencies change and we're not giving feedback, or our supervisors are not engaging in ongoing observations and ongoing performance monitoring. So they're not seeing that something that we trained on is now ineffective or inefficient, or could be better, right? So there are lots of reasons, but the critical piece for sustained high performance is that we as managers and supervisors need to engage in ongoing performance monitoring of our staff. Couple of things to think about when we talk about observing our staff or engaging or interacting with our staff, particularly around performance monitoring. It should be frequent, especially if we've just trained, especially if the person is new, especially if the skills are complicated, especially if there's high risk associated. We want our observations to be really frequent, and then we can fade them based on successful performance. So I might say, I want to watch every single session of a brand new person for 2 sessions, or I might want to see something implemented 3 times a week or 5 times a week. And if that individual is performing at 100% or 80% accuracy or what have you for that period, maybe I'm going to reduce it by half or whatever. Again, like with mastery criteria for training, I can't tell you what the right fade schedule is. That's going to depend on the criticality of the skill, the complexity of the skill, the performance of your staff. So I think you have to be flexible with that. But again, my recommendation is you put these things on paper. You can always be flexible. If you design something that was just too intense and you can't afford it in terms of billable hours or time or what have you, resources, then you can always shift it a little. But if you don't have something mapped out ahead of time, you won't have something to go back to and modify if needed. Your observations can be scheduled or not scheduled. I think mostly it's best to have scheduled visits. I think unless you work in a setting that naturally provides that kind of pop-in opportunity, maybe you're in a clinic and it's super easy, you're going to the bathroom, so you pop in and say hi to clients or something like that. But particularly with in-home services, this or community-based services, the sort of not scheduled can be tricky. And I think it can be unsettling for staff when it's not expected. Now, if you are going to do those kind of pop-in visits, you should set that expectation from day one. You should let folks know, this is our typical schedule of observation. This is, you know, how you'll know that a scheduled observation is happening. And by the way, we also have a very important culture of transparency. My door is open. You can pop in anytime. And I also will feel free to pop in to your session at any time. So if you're going to use unscheduled visits, it's really important that you let people know. Now, there are some specific contexts, like, you know, you've got a performer with persistent performance issues, but they perform really well when they're being observed, whether or not it's scheduled or someone just pops in. You may need to get a little bit more creative with how you're going to get an appropriate observation of that individual. But generally speaking, I would say have them be scheduled, let everybody know. And if you are going to do those unscheduled, make sure that expectation is clear to everyone. You also have a couple of options. You can do live, and by live, I mean synchronous. So I don't necessarily mean in person. If you can do it in person, great, but it could be live like this, right? Like, hey, Tyra, I'm going to do an observation of your session today, and you're going to set the iPad up and we're going to FaceTime and I'm going to observe you. That works too. Or you And I guess you also can do pre-recorded video samples that you then review and then do something with, score it, give some feedback, review it with the person after the fact. And then there's structured and not structured. Structured would be something that has a checklist that goes with it. You're watching, you're scoring how they are behaving. Are they doing the things in the right order? Are they doing enough or not enough of something? And then there's not structured, right? That's where you're just kind of maybe you're there to actually help assess the client, and you're also kind of watching, or you're just kind of popping in to see how things are going, but you don't have like a procedural integrity check that you're scoring or anything like that. I think it's a great idea to make sure that you communicate to folks what kind of observation it's going to be, especially newer staff, staff that don't have as much experience in settings where they get observed. They might not know how to behave. Sometimes when people are stressed, they talk more, ask more questions. So you might have to say, hey, when I'm observing you, here's what I expect. Please don't ask any questions unless it's an emergency. We'll have time afterwards to debrief. And I think it's a good idea for structured observations for you to give the tools that you're going to use to your staff ahead of time. Those are great opportunities for them to use a procedural integrity check while they're doing the thing. It doesn't really serve as an official procedural integrity check, but it might actually shape their behavior and prevent drift, right? And if you have folks working in close proximity to one another, physically distant enough to prevent any kind of infections, but let's say they're working in a clinic where they could maybe even score each other, and you have created a culture where that would be beneficial for folks. That's another way that people can use procedural or treatment integrity checks. What we know about treatment integrity errors is that they can be related to unpredictable or variable client outcomes. And in general, they might be barriers to learner improvement, reduction in problem behavior, acquisition of skills, things like that. So we want to make sure that we're engaging in ongoing performance management because it's critical for the consumers of our services. And we also know that the more present we are with our staff, the less drift we have, the better typically speaking, unless that supervisor is super punishing. Typically speaking, though, that increases staff satisfaction. They're able to get small issues dealt with and problem solved quickly and efficiently. So just a quick reminder, procedural integrity checks, that's when you're gonna have a list of the things that they need to be doing. You're gonna score it, you're gonna have a percentage. I also think it's a great idea to write down some examples so that you can be very specific in your feedback of what went well and what things didn't. So instead of just, you know, you didn't clear the array after a trial in discrete trial teaching on 20% of occasions, you can be a little bit more specific, right? You can say, like, for example, in this trial, you put the reinforcer right on top of the materials. And in this other one, you sort of leaned on the materials and tickled the kid or whatever. So you can have your score, but you also can jot down those specific answers or those specific examples that will help give context to the feedback. And then again, you can reduce your frequency of observations with high level performers. And then you also want to be conducting inter-observer agreement checks with their data collection. So taking data at the same time that they're taking data and then comparing to make sure that you're getting accurate representation. Here's a great table that is originally from Riccardi and reproduced and modified a little bit in that Novak article. And so I really like this. This is kind of just like a general, you know, observation in vivo checklist that you can use that isn't even specific to a task. So this is something that you could develop and have around, even if you're not going in to look at a specific program or some specific behaviors of a staff. What you see on the screen now are just two examples from a book that I co-authored. And these are just showing different ways that you can track competencies, and that it's important that you don't, again, have this cookie cutter approach. It's not just like, oh, well, can you do it, 2 times with 80% accuracy? It's going to matter maybe the audience, or if you were able to give examples or identify non-examples or what have you. So just some more samples that you can use. So let's talk a little bit about effective feedback, and then we're going to jump into some diagnostic stuff. So I think that sometimes feedback is associated with only corrective feedback, but in fact, feedback is just information about your performance, the performance that you did in the past or that you've just done in the sort of immediate past, that gives you information about how to engage in that, how to carry out that performance the next time in the future, right? So it could be strengthening it. Tell me all the things I did right that you want me to keep doing. And it could be about changing it. Tell me the things that I need to do differently, better, faster, less of. So that's all feedback is. And I think it's important that we maybe start a cultural shift away from talking about praise and feedback. Praise is feedback. And I don't think that we're doing a service to our folks by separating them in that way, talking about praise and talking about feedback. It should all just be feedback, and we should all be giving it and getting it all the time. There are a couple of different components when you think about effective feedback, and there are folks way more intelligent than I am that have done great studies around feedback. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of the things that I think get talked about a lot, and that we actually have a little bit of research to support doing one thing versus another. You may have been trained to give feedback as a feedback sandwich, or alternatively, you may have been told, like, the feedback sandwich is terrible, don't ever do it. Actually, the effectiveness of feedback is pretty unique to the individual, the feedback recipient, and likely based on our histories. So one performer might not respond well to the feedback sandwich, and another performer might respond well to it. And I think, like, a feedback sandwich tastes bad when it's disingenuous. If it is some surfacey, contextually sort of peripheral praise statement, uh, or two of them with something that is contextually, behaviorally specific in the middle, that's going to feel weird. Like, hey, thanks for your smile. Here's all the stuff you did wrong. And by the way, I like your shirt. Like, that's not effective evidence-based feedback anyway. So let's just throw that out the window and not really worry about that. The question really becomes, do folks like to hear all of the stuff I want you to do more of, or all of the things that I'd like you to change first? And the truth is, although there's some data to indicate that some folks prefer the corrective first, that really it's unique to the individual. And the easiest thing to do is just ask. You can give some examples, right? Like, for example, let's say I was observing you, setting up for a social skills group, and you did a couple of things right, and there was one thing that you forgot. Would you prefer I tell you all the stuff you did awesome and then tell you the thing that you forgot? Or would you prefer I tell you the thing that you forgot first and then lay on all the good stuff at the end? What do you like better? That's the easiest thing to do. In no way would we ever use the exact same feedback, right? The consequence that should impact the future performance of a behavior with our clients. We would never do the same thing for everyone, ever. We know that that's absolutely against our science. We are going to do preference assessments. And if we're savvy, we might do reinforcer assessments. And if a client is, has the vocal and verbal behavior to tell us what they like and want, we can ask them. So it should be the exact same thing with our staff. And again, the easiest way to find out is just ask. We do know that immediate feedback is really critical for acquisition skills. There's some newer data that are pretty cool that sort of suggest maybe that as you acquire skills and become more proficient, you might actually prefer to hear about it a little later. And that makes sense, because if I'm getting fluent at something, I don't want you disrupting me with like a thumbs up and a blah, blah, blah. And likely I'm not making critical, dangerous errors, because then I would want you to step in. But for acquisition, when someone is learning something and they're not yet fluent at it, trying to get your feedback as close to the good thing that you want them to do more of, or maybe the not so optimal thing that you want them to do a little bit differently. Try to get it as close to that as possible. Now, sometimes that's really hard when you're observing sessions. That's why writing down those specific examples can be really helpful. But video can be incredible, because you can actually put your praise right at the moment, or your corrective or supportive feedback right at the moment of the behavior, even though it occurred in the past. So that can be really helpful for folks as they're acquiring skills. Everybody hates to watch themselves. I don't know what to say to make that easier. If you have someone for some personal reason that they don't want to do it, don't make them do it. I hate it. I can't stand it. I don't even want to look at pictures of myself. Like, people take pictures and they're like, you want to see? Nope. If you like it, you post it. I'm cool with it. So if you are going to videotape and review, one thing that you can do is videotape yourself and let them review you. Let them do a review of you. Give them the procedural integrity check and let them give you some feedback, and let them have to see you be uncomfortable being watched and watching yourself on video. And I think it's one of those, it's a low effort way to say, I value you and I get that this sucks and I'm willing to do it too. Your feedback should always be behavioral specific, always. Awesome, great job, not quite. That's not going to cut it. It's got to be behaviorally specific. What is it that they did well that you want them to do more of, and why? And what is it that they didn't quite hit the mark on, and what should they do instead? And maybe why is that not what you wanted them to do? And then always delivered with compassion and respect. Giving feedback about performance isn't about being ingratiating. It's not about feeling powerful. It's not about making someone feel bad. It's not about you telling them that they're not good enough. It's just about helping them be the best fill in the blank that they can possibly be. Okay, so briefly, 3 types of performance feedback given to us from Major, and these are adequacy, diagnostic, and corrective. And I like thinking about feedback in this way because it even gets, I mean, you could insert praise for adequacy because adequacy sounds like cold oatmeal, right? Like nobody wants to be adequate. So you could say praise, and that describes what was done correctly or well. And then diagnostic, that describes what was done incorrectly or, didn't hit the mark. And then there's the corrective feedback piece. And so likely when you're giving feedback to folks, you're going to have some of all of these. And you might even have some corrective that goes with praise. Like I can praise someone because they did a great job getting really close, right? Like you you're approximating what I really want, and I'm going to praise that. Or you did it with a lot of energy, or like it was better than last time. But I might still have to give you some corrective information, some supportive information about what I need you to do. Like that, yes, do it exactly like that, but do it twice as fast. Or yes, do it exactly like that with a smile on your face, or what have you, right? Like, if you're playing with a client or something. So, um, just a moment on the bidirectionality of feedback. Feedback should shape the recipient and the giver. You should be giving feedback in a way that it's effective and it's pleasurable to the degree that you can make it. Sometimes feedback is tough, I get it. But very specifically that produces change, because someone being appreciative of your praise, someone responding to your praise, that will all or your feedback, I'm sorry, that will all reinforce your feedback giving. It will strengthen your feedback giving. And so you need to adjust how you give feedback. Some folks are cool with sarcasm, other folks not so much. Some people really are cool with an upbeat, very energetic person like me. Other people need me to tone myself down a little bit. And I am responsible for getting that information and finding out what's going to be most effective. That supervisee can shape my feedback giving skills. And I also want to make sure that I'm talking to my supervisees about how they should receive feedback. And that feedback should flow both ways, right? Like I am giving feedback, but I also need feedback. And so creating lots of opportunities, and really think about how you phrase your feedback. Saying things like, all right, so what you're doing wrong is this. It can be specific, but I wonder if it would feel better if it was framed like, what I would love to see you try is this. Or if you remember from training, what we do at this point is XYZ. Instead of like, you're forgetting to, render your whatever. It's really easy to miss that step, but it's critically important that you do it. That feels a lot better. It's a little more instructive. It kind of talks about the importance of the skill. This appendix script comes also from the book. And as a matter of fact, if you go to www.sloan publishing, it's SLOAN publishing.com/super, you can get access to the book for 15% off and free shipping. So if you would like to do that, please do so. If you want to buy multiple copies for your colleagues, great. All I ask is that you don't share that link with other folks that didn't attend. That sort of, if you think the content might be beneficial, it's my gift to you for attending and listening to me this evening. But this just gives a script for how you can talk about feedback to your supervisees, to your trainees, and really framing it early on in your onboarding training, the value of feedback and the fact that it's going to be flowing all over the place. It is our most powerful tool to shape each other's behavior. And here's another resource from that book. both of these are. The first is, so on the left-hand side of the screen, these are a set of questions that you can ask supervisees and trainees, sort of like, what can I do better? And then if they've given you feedback, how you can reinforce and strengthen that. And then the other are just other ways that you can incorporate more natural check-ins around soliciting feedback. Again, it's sloanpublishing.com/super. All right, so let's jump into talking about addressing performance issues. So it's really important that we don't just guess. And I will tell you from my experience, the most common thing that people will say when there's a performance issue, first they'll get mentalistic and say this person just doesn't get it or what have you. But then they'll be like, we need more training. We need to throw more training at them. And that's not often what we need. So common reactions to performance issues with your staff, particularly persistent performance issues, or ignoring it, or kind of being, pussyfooting around the issue and addressing it indirectly, or just a hard pass, like I'm not going to address it at all, or in fact, I want someone else to supervise this person. And none of these things will fix the issue, and none of them will increase your skill set as a supervisor. So you just got to take a deep breath and take care of stuff. So what I'm going to share is the performance diagnostic checklist for human service, which is a type of functional assessment for performance issues in the human service setting. There are some general functions of poor performance when it comes to our staff, and those include things like unclear expectations, the training wasn't sufficient, or maybe it was too long ago. There's not enough ongoing performance management by way of supervision and feedback. The individual lacks motivation to do the thing, or the systems within which they have to do the thing are not sufficient, or they don't have access to the materials, or the materials are substandard, or they're not streamlined, or they don't have other resources they need to get the thing done. So there is this lovely article by Carr and colleagues that provides us, so it's free at the end of this article, but also demonstrates via an empirical study that this diagnostic tool is superior to just like what we would normally maybe do to address performance issues. It looks like this. I'm going to go through each section, so don't worry if you're not familiar with it. These are the data. So what you see for most legs in the first condition baseline is just what was happening. And then for the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels, you see the performance improve after the specific intervention that was based on the assessment tool was put in place. Those last two, you see a non-indicated intervention first, and it was not effective. And then you see the assessment indicated intervention put in place, and you see an immediate increase in the skill. This is another example, and this is in a very applied setting. So the previous study was done, at a university-based clinic with lots of BCBAs and BCBADs around. This study was conducted in public preschools with special ed teachers with no specific training in behavior analysis. And the target was some error correction procedures during discrete trial instruction. So what you see again on the left in baseline for all participants is their performance, their percentage of correct performance on this skill, and then the non-indicated. So this is what the teacher sort of felt was reasonable to do. And you see a little bit of increase for a couple of people. And for the last participant, you do see a fairly sustained and jump up from baseline, but nowhere near where we would want. That's only getting the person to, on average, a little under 60%. But then when the indicated intervention was put in place by the preschool teachers, you see an immediate increase all the way to mastery. And these data just indicate that the folks found the PDCHS in this applied setting useful. So, this is how confident they were before they had the PDCHS in terms of addressing staff performance problems. After after using it, that they thought it was effective, that they would recommend it, things like that. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the PDCHS right now. The first thing that you're going to do is operationally define the performance problem. You don't want to use overarching terms like they're unprofessional or they're disorganized or they're argumentative or they are toxic or whatever. None of those describe the actual behaviors that are problematic, that are barriers to whatever it is that needs to happen. So be specific, describe exactly what you see. And if you find yourself sort of making a laundry list, pick one. It may be the case that if you affect change on one behavior, if it's functionally related to others, or if fixing that performance issue means the person is contacting so much more reinforcement, you may generally see improvement in other areas. Now, that's not always the case, but what you can do is pick one, and if you don't see improvement in other areas, you can redo the assessment for those specific skills. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So keep it really narrow. Step 2, figure out how you're going to implement it. There are a couple of different ways. The most standard way is that the supervisor in charge of the person is completing it, especially if that person is a behavior analyst. If they're not a behavior analyst, then the behavior analyst might be helping. So if it's in a school setting and it's a general ed teacher with maybe a paraprofessional that's in their room, a consulting behavior analyst might help that teacher complete it. But when it says you complete, it means that person's direct supervisor is the one kind of completing it. Another option is the way I described it, where there is a manager or a higher level supervisor that is helping the direct manager or supervisor to complete it. And then there's an unconventional use. Hopefully we'll get some data soon about this use, but this is where you might complete it right alongside the target employee. You're going to want to make sure you have a good relationship with that person if you are using this sort of strategy. Then you're going to go through and you're going to score. It's pretty easy. It's dichotomous. It's a yes or a no. Any item that has an asterisk indicates that you need to be answering based on a recent direct observation. Now, if you are the person that sees this performance all the time and you just saw it this morning or yesterday, you can score it based on that. But if you haven't seen it in a while, you might need to schedule some observations. You want to score based on consistent repeated patterns. So if someone all of a sudden has some big performance issue and they have no past of having that performance issue, you don't want to use the PDCHS likely, because there could be an acute life event going on that could explain that. Maybe they were ill, maybe they just lost a loved one, who knows? So you want this for performance issues that have persisted and haven't responded to the typical kinds of things that you've done. And if you have available data like performance integrity checks or videos or things like that, you can go to those and review them as well. A lot of people ask me when I'm talking about the PDCHS, like, well, if I go observe the person, they're going to behave differently. That's possible. I will say, generally speaking, folks are going to behave the way they behave in most instances, and people have done some pretty shocking things right in front of me. But I think if you have reason to believe that the individual is going to be sensitive to your observation, you may need to be a little bit more careful. You might want to observe for a long time or engage in several observations, see if you can capture a video and review it, that sort of thing. So then you're going to go through your scoring. And when you're scoring it, it may be the case, well, you want to use objective language, obviously, but if you're coaching someone else through completing it, you want to make sure they are using objective behavioral language with examples, with explanations, not mentalistic terms like they just didn't get it, or overarching things like they're so lazy, right? Be specific and facilitate that kind of language. Now, if you're completing it with that supervisor, you can model and have them practice some feedback around this stuff, right? So you may be doing it with a supervisor or a trainee, and you want not only to help them complete the PDCHS for this performer, but you also want to teach them about the performance diagnostic checklist for human service in general, so that when they are more independent, they are able to train other people to use it. So that's just sort of an additional benefit when you are using a structured tool like this. This is the training section. And you're just going to go through and answer these questions. Has the employee received formal training? And if yes, then it gets specific, because sometimes people get a lot of training that's really subpar. So did that training include instructions, demonstration, opportunity to practice with feedback? Can the person accurately describe what they're supposed to be done, what they're supposed to be doing, and when it's supposed to be happening? So very specific questions about whether or not the person was trained, right? So can they do it as quickly as they need to, if that's an issue, if fluency is an issue, if they can do it, but not as fluently as they need to, as fast as they need to, maybe they're constantly referring to supports and materials, and that's a barrier, then you have specific information about what your intervention needs to include. The next section is around task clarification and prompting. So these are asking questions like, does the person even know they're supposed to do it? Can they state the purpose of the task, which gets back to your training, providing a clear rationale? Is there a job aid or some sort of support for them to do it, especially if it's complicated, or if it's something that they don't do very often, or it's something that has to be done really specifically, always in these steps? Are they ever reminded to do it, if that's something that could be useful? So these get all about sort of the supports and the context within which they're performing. This section is all about the resources, the materials, and the processes that you have set up in place for this performance. Are there enough people trained to do it? If there are materials required, are they high quality? Are they accessible? Are they well organized? Does doing this thing require something else be done first? And does someone else have to do that thing? So is your staff performance, in the staff that you're interested in, is their performance impeded by the fact that someone else isn't getting the pre-steps done in time or at high quality? So again, this allows you to figure out where you're going to focus your interventions. And then this section is about performance consequences, effort, and competition. Do they get supervision? Are they observed doing it, and how frequently? Is it only monthly? Because that's probably not enough. And one thing I love about the performance diagnostic checklist is so much of this is not about the performer, and it's about the systems, the materials, the training, the performance monitoring that we're providing them. There's a quote: if you pit a high performer against a poor or a crappy system, that system's going to win every time. So using a structured approach like this can really help you highlight and shine a light on where the issues are. I really love number 3. Does the employee ever see the effects of accurate task completion? Many of our direct line staff do a lot of work, and they don't really see the output or the outcome, or they don't, they're not trained even to understand it. So, do they see the graphed data? Do they understand what that means? Do folks understand about rendering their time and what that means for clients' authorizations and things like that? And then there's an intervention planning guide at the end. So basically, depending on how you scored different items in the training, task clarification, prompting, resources, materials, and processes, and performance, consequences, effects, and competition sections, it will drive you to sample function matched interventions. Because again, if the issue is the materials are not available, then training isn't going to help fix that issue, right? So we want function matched interventions. And then there are some resources at the end. Now, This is the closer shot of the intervention guide. And so essentially any item that you scored as no, that is a nomination for a potential intervention area. And it may be the case that you get several areas indicated, and that's okay. So any of those items with a no indicates a possible intervention. But if you have answers that are clustered around specific areas, then you want to give priority to those areas. You also can combine or sequence interventions. Maybe you don't have enough resources, or you want to try the less effortful thing first. And then you have to implement, you have to design it, implement it, follow through with anything you're supposed to do. For example, go observe them, go do those procedural integrity checks, give high quality feedback, evaluate your outcomes, modify if needed, and where you can, build in self-management components for folks. Have them do self-procedural integrity checks, have them videotape themselves, watch back, and score. Here's your second participation word, breathe, something that I don't do much of when I'm presenting. So I'm sorry I talk so fast, but we're very close to the end. And for our last few minutes, I have some exciting news. So Dr. Jim Carr, Dr. Dave Wilder, Dr. Dennis Brand, and I all have done significant work with the PDCHS, and we have endeavored to create a new version, so 1.1 version of the performance diagnostic checklist that just has, after lots of feedback from using it over several years, some enhanced instructions, a little bit more precision in some of the scoring areas. So you can see training is significantly bigger now, and a little bit more guidance in terms of how to score some of these things. It's not yet published. We'll be doing a study to sort of validate it and make sure that it's not, we didn't mess anything up or make something that was so much less pleasant or much harder to use. But hopefully this will be published at some point in the near future, as well as a user guide or some recommendations for using the PDCHS. So keep an eye out for those coming through. In addition, we have updated the intervention planning section with some more recent literature and some things that didn't show up in the past, in the current version of the PDCHS. Now, you should have gotten hopefully a link to a web page that you can go to and a password where you can download a PDF of these slides, the original article, another article that I shared tonight, as well as the extracted PDCHS that I showed that you can use freely. So the original authors give that to the field. This is an example, again, by chief motivating officers of a version of a performance diagnostic assessment that they created. And so this is really cool because this highlights you can use what's already available to you, but maybe you work in organizational behavior management or schools or a hospital or behavioral safety. And actually there is a PDCHS for that kind of setting, but you might want to modify it. You might want to take the same approach, but you want some slightly different specific items in there. And so this is a really cool example of taking that structured approach to wrapping up your performance management by having a structured way to diagnose performance issues. So sometimes things are more than a performance issue. It may be the case that just the relationship is somehow damaged for a number of reasons, or there could be some deficits that your trainee or your staff has that need to be addressed in a different way or maybe can't be addressed. And so this, what you're seeing now are just some ways to guide you towards assessing if it's about maybe a broken relationship that needs to be repaired, or maybe there are some other issues going on. And some considerations for kind of determining the scope and focus of the issue, and really taking some time to self-reflect on your own practices. Like, maybe the common denominator in your 5 staff that are having performance issue is you. And you need to take a little bit of time to think about what you are bringing to this equation that could be a barrier for your folks. And I think it's critically important that not only we start strong, that we have bidirectional feedback, that we give great training, that we diagnose things, but that we be willing to understand that we are part of the equation. We are stimuli in the context that could be a barrier or a stimulus that evokes non-optimal behavior from others. And so it's important that we're willing to understand that sometimes we could be the problem. But that's great news, because if you take a structured approach, then you can affect change. I also want to make sure that, remember what I said, common responses or ignore it or kind of dance around it. It's really important to lean into difficult conversations. Now, I know we only have a few minutes left, but this won't take long. There is kindness in being honest, and you can do it in a way that is compassionate. They are not mutually exclusive. Failing to honor and value your staff enough to sit in your discomfort to have a difficult conversation is not kind to them. You're setting them up for future failure. You might be setting up clients for non-optimal services. So, sitting with your discomfort and finding a way to have a difficult conversation is critically important. Couple of strategies: have a goal and practice, write a script if you need to, find compassion, understand that everybody comes to every situation with their own unique histories and set of circumstances. And if someone is behaving non-optimally, it may be that it's reasonable to them. So instead of punishing them for doing it or saying, I can't believe that you would do that thing, find out why they believe that that is a rational thing to do. And that is going to help drive how you can solve things. So approach things with compassionate curiosity. Watch for safety or risks to safety in the conversation. Is the person, engaging in body language, like putting their arms across their chest, putting their eyes to the floor? And one thing that you can do in that instance is use contrasting statements. You can say things like, Jim, I don't want you to think I'm unappreciative of the effort that you put in every day. I am so grateful that you are here and that you are doing your best. At the same time, I want us to have an open, honest conversation about how I can make sure that you are creating a safe environment for all of our clients, right? So you can use contrasting statements to kind of bring safety back to the situation. This isn't about me demonizing you. This isn't about me telling you you're a bad person. This is just about me valuing you and this work context and us working collaboratively to find out the best way that we can engage in whatever it is that we need to do together. So this also comes from the book that I mentioned earlier. And these are just some skills related to having difficult conversations. You can't make difficult conversations not difficult. It's in the name, like it's a thing. It's just difficult. You can make them less difficult or less unpleasant or more successful. And so, these strategies are specifically effective if you maybe have done something to damage the relationship, but keeping that approach of an open conversation, that you are not there to berate somebody. You're there to start a conversation that is going to describe, explore an issue so that you both can come to an understanding about how the contingencies or the context arranged itself such that this non-optimal performance happened. Here are 3 great books that you can go to. I love Crucial Conversations. I've done this as book clubs with my staff. Fantastic material in there. Difficult Conversations is great. I'm right now digging into Radical Candor. You have to translate things a little bit into behavior analytic language, but these are great resources for folks. So just wrapping it up, create a place that people want to be. Facilitate that culture. Spend some time thinking about what kind of culture you want to create. Invest in high quality training. Identify and address issues early by engaging in high quality performance monitoring, where your supervisors, you're out there, you're on the floor, you're visible to your staff, you're seeing things. Diagnose, don't just guess. Create function matched interventions that you're likely to see performance change with. Engage in some self-reflection. Be willing to understand that you might be part of the problem and really lean into those difficult conversations. I think sitting in discomfort is where learning opportunities live. So I encourage everybody to do that. So that is the end of my presentation. So thank you all so much.
All right, Tyra, thank you very much. There we go. I just have to say, one of the books that you put up there last, the Radical Candor, I actually developed the course and was teaching that to some of the younger people. I happen to have this great book right here, this book, and Tyra is one of the authors. Linda LeBlanc will be our next presenter, and then Shala, the third author, will be our final presenter in the Supervision series. So I have to tell you, one of the things that I liked a lot about this book, well, there's several things, but you made a comment in the preface page that really connected to me. Toward the end of that page, you make a comment that says basically how the process of tutoring and mentoring people have changed you as a professional and as a supervisor. And that's one message I want to put out there to everybody. I mean, 3 decades in the field, and that's some of the most rewarding times that I have had, is working with younger, not necessarily younger, but newer behavior analysts. And the feedback went both ways. Like, I grew from it as well, and hopefully it helped some people. So I connected very much to that. I appreciate that.
I'm so glad you connected with that.
If you'll hang on just for a minute, we will conclude. I know we're getting toward the end of this. So I would like to remind people to, hold on, I got to get it up on my screen here. If you want CEUs for the recorded version, you're going to have to send your name, your BACB number, the webinar title, and the participation words. Wants to thank everybody for attending. I know it's still a little bit risky out there, but it's getting better. So stay safe and be well. And remember that we are going to Miami in March of 2022. So I hope everybody out there will consider joining us to do that. So
maybe I'll get to see some of you there. That would be really cool.
Maybe you will. All right, everybody, I am going to stop the live stream. I'm going to have Tyra hang on here if I can figure out. I think I have to stop the share.